All right, so I am going to skip over this one. Oh, hold on. There we go. I'm going to skip over that. So today I'm here. My name is Callum Brown. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at the Nonprofit Center. And I use she, her pronouns. And I'm joined by my lovely colleague, Jamera. If you want to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Jamera Smith. I'm the Administrative and Programs Coordinator for the Nonprofit Center. And it's nice to meet you two. I hope you guys enjoy the program.
And so I will just say again, I don't know if Kelly, if either of you like heard where the other was at. So if you just want to say one more time for the group, like who like what nonprofit you represent, and then are you like a board member or are you a staff person? Please feel free to share just so that we all feel cozy together.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Yost. I'm a new board member for the Healing Hearts organization in Jacksonville.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. And hey there, our friend from 180. I've missed your name again.
Sorry, I wasn't off mute.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm Camille Smith. I
Camille.
am Camille. Hi.
Hi.
I am the president for the 180 group. And I've been a board member for going on, I want to say 10 years now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've got like a newer board member and some with experience, so that's great. So just a quick FYI for if you're not really familiar with what the Nonprofit Center does, I kind of like to say we're like a chamber for nonprofits, but we exist to connect, strengthen, and advocate for a strong nonprofit community. And we have so many different benefits for our members and everything from our jobs bank to a board bank. So you might be interested in that if you are looking to recruit new board or committee members to your organization. You can actually post that as a member onto our board bank. But we also have a ton of professional development opportunities, and we do a lot of research on the sector, and I'm going to go over a bit of that in just a minute. But if you have any questions about membership at the Nonprofit Center, feel free to chat myself or Joe, and we'll be happy to kind of follow up with you after the program. So again, I had a few kind of housekeeping rules for Zoom, but let's not worry about that. If you have questions or anything you want to stop me, just unmute yourself, no problem. And just an FYI of some other events coming up in the next couple of months. We do have our big retirement party for our CEO, Rena Coughlin, tomorrow. She's been at the helm for like 18 years. So if you've ever met Rena or know about her, feel free to come join us tomorrow morning. We're having a big party for her. And then we have a couple of other events coming up this year. And then the next board roles, we do offer it quarterly because we like to offer it as a way to bring in, new board members or just provide ongoing education. So if you have others that think should attend this program, please send them to us in January and we'd be happy to talk to them. But whenever we started training, we like to ground it in our Stronger Nonprofits framework. What this means to us is really just these 4 key pillars of what a strong, sustainable nonprofit needs. And really our focus here today is on that first pillar of high performing leadership teams. And for us, that is the relationship between the CEO and the board. So even if you don't have like a paid CEO, whoever kind of that operational head of the organization is along with the board. Then after that, it's organizational learning and impact measurement, access to capital, and external awareness and advocacy. So we have trainings that are really based in every single pillar. And if you have additional questions, again, about access to capital or advocacy, we could definitely hook you up with some additional resources on those topics. So just our quick agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the state of the sector and some research that we do and what we know about nonprofits in Northeast Florida, talk about the board roles, of course, and then discuss some like best practices and hopefully help you all to brainstorm things to bring back to your board. So a little bit around the research side. What we know about a nonprofit, of course, is that it does have to benefit the community. That is the biggest thing, is really how, in what way, in what bucket is it, religion, health, social services, what bucket do you fulfill in the community? And of course, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. So we do have to raise revenue in order to invest that into our programs and services. There are advocacy restrictions for nonprofits, but that is actually a big piece of our mission at the Nonprofit Center, is to make nonprofits aware that you can and should advocate on behalf of your organization if there is some tie to the policy realm. While nonprofits are not able to support an individual like political candidate or donate to political campaigns, you can host things like candidate forums where you bring out people from different perspectives to hear their opinions on the specific issue. And you can do things like actually lobby. Like there's a great example with the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. A few years back, they passed the half-cent sales tax here in Duval County, and that was directly tied to lobbying work that they had paid lobbyists for. So nonprofits can be involved in advocacy work. And if you have, again, questions about that, please follow up with us, because that's a big part of our mission at the center. And from our most recent State of the Sector research, which was 2019, so some of this data is a little old, but I will say we are doing our 2024 State of the Sector this coming year. So we'll have brand new research, but we know that this sector is about 1,300 nonprofits here locally. You might see numbers as big as 8,000, but what we're actually tracking when we do that research is the number that filed a 990 in the past year. And so the 990, of course, is your annual tax filing. And you wouldn't file an annual tax filing if you didn't bring in any revenue. So that just goes to show the kind of picture of a lot of nonprofits is that they may be operating on a very small basis, or not able to bring in revenue for that year. So, these bullets on the bottom here can be a little hard to swallow, but I will say that in the 20 years we've been doing this research, that number of nonprofits that have operated in the red has remained pretty stagnant. That 35% has not really changed. But of course, we do say that it's a myth that there are too many nonprofits, because we know there's always demand that our nonprofits are not able to meet. So, just what does that mean for as far as sustainability of our mission work, and, how can we continue to build on relationships in the sector so that we can, be more effective at our mission work, and also collaborate if there are opportunities out there in the environment. So from our recent public opinions research that we did back in 2022, we were happy to find that about 80% of Northeast Florida residents, really did believe in the power of the nonprofit sector. And, we did this research back in 2011 as well. And we saw significant growth and a lot of positive indicators that just show that the public really believe that we are a big part of the economy, that, we deliver services more efficiently than the government, and that really we should be more well funded. So this is great for us to know, just as talking points when we're trying to connect with potential volunteers or donors or board members, that, for those folks that really don't know a lot about the sector and maybe think that we're weak or that we don't have a large impact, that really we have a huge impact. And so how can we be accountable for that and be good stewards of things like, money that's coming into our organization? What else we saw as far as the percentages of people that did volunteer and donate, we did segregate these out based on age groups, because a lot of times we hear things like, oh, well, sure, we need young folks to be involved, but they don't really have a lot of impact, or they don't have a lot of power. But when we look at, statistics like this, we see how a lot of young folks are actually volunteering and donating. And so what does that mean as far as how can we nurture that? Because we know the likelihood of volunteers actually transitioning into donors is very high. So if we have a lot of young people engaged with our organization already as volunteers, is there the potential to get them to eventually donate? And what does that look like? It just might be a different picture than maybe your boomer generation that's donating and volunteering. So just some more interesting information from our recent research. When it comes to boards, we really need board members at the helm, because they are truly the owners of a nonprofit organization. And we know you really are only here to do this work because you believe in something, right? So we are super thankful to you both, for being board members and board volunteers, because nonprofits can't run without board people at the helm. So why do we need them? Again, it's really about filtering down the needs and issues and potential threats and opportunities that are present in the community at the environmental level. And the board really helps to filter that down into the organization. And that's why we need really diverse boards as well, so that we can hear from a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives around, what do we need to do to make our organization stronger in the next 3 to 5 years. When it comes to things like strategic planning, board members are crucial because we need all of those different insights. And of course, there are really obvious legal, ethical, and practical reasons. So legally, the board is providing checks and balances for what the organization is trying to do. Oftentimes, a regular person on the street might think that the CEO of a nonprofit is the owner, but we know that's not true. The CEO reports to the board of directors. So practically, the board exists to help support and advise the CEO, helping with things like the strategy, the visioning, resource generation. The board plays a ton of practical reasons, practical supports that way. And then, of course, ethically, again, being that checks and balances, but also just being that voice of the people, of the community. And that role of, financial oversight that the board plays is a really, really important one, and one that we hope you take, very seriously. And if there's questions about finances and things, that those are, hand raised, brought to the table for the full board to discuss. So when we talk a little bit more about volunteerism versus board service, they are different, of course, but one is just generally more operational on the volunteer side versus being more of a governance or strategy side through the board. So both are extremely valuable. Many nonprofits rely on both volunteers and, of course, board members to do their work. But, just what kind of role do you play as far as, implementation of programs versus the actual, strategy around developing the goals for those plans to be implemented? The main legal and fiduciary duties are these. So the duty of obedience, that's really, staying true to the organization's mission and bylaws, of course, public law as well, saying, whatever is set forth in like our articles and our bylaws, we agree to, and that we're going to make happen for the organization. The duty of care is referring usually to things like the financial oversight, right? So, using our best judgment, really actively participating in board meetings and paying attention and being able to ask those important questions. Because oftentimes when we hear things like a nonprofit has failed or had to close their doors, it always usually comes down to finances. And what you never want to hear the board say is like, oh, we didn't know, we didn't see the red flags. Well, that's like one of the primary roles you play, is that sitting at a board meeting, reading those financial documents and being able to say like, hey, this doesn't look right to me. Can we have a discussion about it? And that can be hard sometimes, right? In boardrooms, when maybe there is some power dynamics or there's cliques among the board. So how has our board really taken time to develop like that culture of inquiry and being able to say like, hey, I have questions about this, like, let's please talk about it. And then the duty of loyalty is avoiding conflicts of interest. Of course, here in the state of Florida, we actually have to sign our conflict of interest policies annually. So it's not something that should be hidden or unaware of for board members in Florida. But it's, putting aside whatever our like personal or professional interests might be for the greater good of the organization. So conflicts of interest do often happen. If you're needing a CPA or a law firm or something like that to represent the organization, and you have a board member that represents that industry, those conflicts do arise. But it's really, how do I handle the conflict? Do we, get multiple bids or prospects that we are looking at? And then do we recuse that potential board member representing the conflict from a vote, and putting all of that information in our minutes, so that if anyone were to ever question this potential conflict, that we can say, look, we handled this the appropriate, transparent way. And then there's one more that we always throw in there called the duty of transparency. And that's really referring things like, posting your 990 on your website, doing an annual report. These are things that are required annually anyways. And because we are public organizations, anyone from the public can find this information by Googling it, but why not make it a little easier on our constituents and just saying we have nothing to hide. We post our 990 and our annual reports on our website. So anyone that has questions about, our finances this past year, what activities we did, or who our major donors are, they can find all of that information just by visiting our website, as opposed to having to Google it and find it on their own. So a couple of things around fiduciary responsibility. Of course, this is really referring to things like, have we made sure that we are really looking at all of the important financial documents, such as our balance sheet and our profit and loss, at every single board meeting? Does the entire board have a role to play in reviewing the annual budget, in reviewing our IRS Form 990? When it comes to audits, not every organization, depending on your size, needs to have one. The Florida statute requirements are that if you receive less than 500,000 in annual contributions, that you could do a review of the audit. Whereas if there's 500,000 but less than $1 million, you do have to have a review of the audit done. And then if it's more than $1 million, you have to have an actual independent audit take place. So it really just depends on what scale your organization is at financially. It's not always required that you do a full audit every single year, though. So, how is the board doing when it comes to these bullet points? These are the key ones when it comes to financial matters. Of course, we know board members are often not going to be financial experts. I'm not a CPA, I don't work at a bank. But again, are we really comfortable in learning how to read these financial documents? If we have board members that are coming to us saying hey, I'm not comfortable with it, I don't really know what I'm looking at. Is there the opportunity to sit down, with newer board members and kind of make sure, go through the financial statements with them to make sure they understand what they're looking at? Continuing education segments are always can be really engaging for board members. If we have maybe had a set crew of board members that has been around for years, if we're bringing on new people, just do we need to offer some additional supports around, again, reading financials, or is it understanding what our programs are? Just giving board members more opportunities to really actively learn about the organization can be really helpful, because again, they play such a big role in setting that financial strategy for the year. So if we have a finance committee, are we rotating out those board members and bringing in the newer ones so that they get an opportunity to learn and participate in that realm as well? So it's really just about we have to know the basics when it comes to being a board member and understanding financials. And let's see, when it looks at, our business models, the questions are really just understanding what is our structure. Do we have a bigger reliance on government grants and contracts than we do contributions? Or are we an organization that is pretty much entirely funded by fundraising dollars, and we, don't have an earned income stream? So how is the organization bringing in money? And then really, how is that broken up? Do we have a lot of restricted funds versus unrestricted? And then is that, stable for us? Looking at those questions around, really, is there a whale in our bucket? Because sometimes the whale can be kind of precarious if, say, again, it is tied to government contracting. And we know, unfortunately, just with the changing of who's in office can change the amount of dollars that we have available to us year after year. So, what are our opportunities? Have we had time to really sit down as a board and think about, do we have the right infrastructure in place? And then do we have safeties, backups, an endowment, or, cash reserves? So where if there is another pandemic that happens, next month, do we have 2 months of operating cash on hand, 3 months, 6 months, 0 months? These are big questions for us to answer, especially in times of, strife or things that might be changing. So let's do a couple of quick polls. I'm going to have Jamera launch a poll for us. And it might be kind of funny because there's just a couple of us, but it'll be just interesting to see. So the first poll is, how many of these financial documents do you review during board meetings? So Jamera should be able to launch that, and you'll see it pop up in front of you.
I'm
And
not
I know
sure if you guys want me to answer these. I haven't sat on a meeting yet.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, then you know what? Let's go ahead, Jamera. Why don't we skip the polls? We'll just end them real quick because I don't know if our Camille, if you're on the phone, you might not even be able to see the polls right now. So we'll just stop. But I want to see then. Oops, sorry. So maybe Camille, what financial documents do you normally review at your board meetings?
We usually will review the latest contributions depending on if we just had an event, or if we have one coming up. At our end of the year board meetings, we'll review, of course, the annual reports. I feel like another one you listed was also familiar, but I can't think of it at this time.
Yeah,
You are correct. I am via the phone, so I can't see it, but I definitely plan to go back and watch once she sent out the recording.
okay.
But I have been trying to listen and jot down my notes over here.
No problem. Yeah. So just the couple of options that were then listed just for both of you were like cash flow, your budget, your balance sheet, a dashboard, or a profit and loss statement. So those are like really typical documents like the profit and loss, the budget, the cash flow. Those would be normal ones to be looking at board meetings. And then sometimes what people are not familiar with is what we call a financial dashboard. And I'll actually send out an example of that in the follow-up email to this session. But we at the Nonprofit Center use for our board what we call a financial dashboard. That's kind of a more graphical picture or snapshot of all of these documents into one. So it can just be a really great way to make it easier on your board to actually look at all of the financials in a clear picture. We still send out the individual documents, of course, like the P&L and the budget and the cash flow. But then in a graphical kind of dashboard snapshot, you can see the bigger picture. And it's just an easier way, especially for newer board members, to look at that and say like, oh, okay, I can see, the trend is going up or it's going down, or this looks bad, or this looks weird. So just an example that we'll send out for you all to check out. And then the couple of other just questions that we were going to go through are, do you review your IRS 990 with your full board? Ideally, we want that answer to be yes. It shouldn't be just the finance committee that reviews the 990 or just the CEO and board chair. The full board should be able to review the 990 and approve that, say, okay, this looks good to us. We're in good financial standing for the year. And same thing with, the external audit. So really small organizations, you do not need to do an audit every single year. But again, if your organization is 1 million plus, you do have to have an independent audit done by a CPA every year. Audits are expensive, but they are really, really crucial again for those organizations that are larger when we're looking at a lot of different maybe revenue line items or a lot of different assets that the organization holds, to just make sure that as an independent CPA is signing off that everything looks on the up and up. So that was just one of the other questions we'll go through. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the traditional roles. A great quote to kind of start us off from Board Source is, two particular characteristics matter most: the board's understanding of its roles and responsibilities, and the board's ability to work as a collaborative team towards shared goals. I always love going through this kind of pyramid. It's from Patrick Lencioni. So this is the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And really what he's clarifying here for us is that the basis of getting any singular team to, really productive, actionable results is to start from a basis of trust. So how, if we're coming into a boardroom where perhaps the culture is very tense for any reason, if you do see that there's board cliques happening, if there are boards where you've been there, if there's a lot of people on the board that have been there for years and years and years, and then you're starting to bring in newer folks, how are they kind of working their way into the culture of the board? Trust is so huge, because without trust, it takes us time to get to a place where we can have really productive conflict, because it's okay to have debate and to have conflict, but generally it's easier to do that with people that at the end of the day you trust and that you're going to be able to resolve the conflict with. If we're having issues of trust, it's hard for us to get past issues that are really contentious among a group. So trust comes from really diverse groups. We cultivate relationships with each other. There's actually research from Board Source that says boards that spend at least 5 hours a year together socially have more effective teams, because again, the social part plays so much into our trust and our relationships with one another. So 5 hours a year, that could be a board retreat, that could be a board holiday party, or some kind of other social that you have once or twice a year, or maybe you also have your board meeting, but you have a set aside time of an hour or 2 hours after, before the board meeting, where the board members can just come and engage with one another on a friendly way. So, kind of getting through trust, we have those kind of environment that is more discussion based. We can actually start to commit to our decisions instead of saying, this group over here says one thing and this group over here thinks the other thing. And it's kind of hard to get to a place where we all agree. And then if we can actually commit to decisions we say we're going to do, can we hold one another accountable? Because a lot of, board work actually happens in committees, or it happens when we are having board members go out and connect with potential donors. Can we trust and, hold our board members accountable and follow up with them that if they said they were going to do XYZ, are they actually going to do it? So through that, we're able to evaluate our performance and get to those stronger results at the top of the pyramid there. So great, just resource to check out. And another great quote from Nonprofit Quarterly, really oftentimes this operations versus governance issue comes up. And what we're talking about with operations is, the day-to-day work that it takes to have the organization run smoothly, versus governance, which is really, again, the strategy visioning side. So the board should really, really be focused on the future at all times, because of course, yes, we want to evaluate our performance day to day, but that is often for the staff or operational volunteers if you don't have staff. But we need to be thinking about what's next for the organization at all times, or we could run the risk of becoming stagnant and losing our funding. So, depending on what stage your nonprofit is in, you'll also see different stages of the board life cycle. So, often when we are brand new kind of grassroots organizations, we are probably going to be really small, mostly volunteer led. And there's kind of this really specific focus on the operations, because if you don't have paid staff, you're thinking, how's this program going to run? And board members might be stepping in to do that. But you'll start to see, as organizations grow and kind of scale, there might be more of a shift to the governance, and there will be more of a development of more committees, because really board work happens in committees. Board meetings for the full board are where we don't want to say just report out. That should be really discussion based at a board meeting. But when we're talking about things like, deciding if we need a new strategic plan or developing the annual budget and things like that, that's happening in the specific committees. Like in the finance committee, they're doing specific work around the budget and understanding the numbers, and then bringing that information to the full board for greater discussion. Same thing with the governance committee. You're talking about, hey, we need to do an evaluation of our CEO this year. So we're going to kind of set that up and talk about what that means in the governance committee, and then we'll bring that to the full board for greater discussion. So, it's not to say if you're at stage one that you're bad or anything. It's just keeping in mind like where your nonprofit is at right now. If they've only been around 2 or 3 years, you're probably going to have a smaller, more operational board, and that's okay. It's just being aware of where we're at right now. And so this is a typical, structure that you would see. Of course, the staff reporting to CEO and the CEO reports to the board. You could have volunteers that are operational, again, that really just report to staff and kind of operation like programs and services that the organization offers. But again, there could also be volunteers that report directly to the board. So an example is, say you do need a new strategic plan for the organization. Oftentimes the board itself is already so busy with their own board work that you might say, okay, then we need a strategic planning task force. It is a short-term thing. It is not a full-term ongoing year after year committee, but it's a task force that we're going to pull together. And we might have, 1 or 2 current board members sit on that task force, but we're also going to bring in some external volunteers that are in our wheelhouse, people that we've worked with or partnered with as an organization that can provide us some really good feedback on what they think we should be doing in our next strategic plan. So this is just one example. And as they always say, if you've seen one board, you've seen one board. Many nonprofits operate in very different ways. So it can be helpful to get some various board experience to see how others do it. But, you know, the reasons that we often see kind of board CEO issues arise is because there's really a lack of trust. There's ineffective division of labor and poor communication. So that relationship is really vital. And so how do we clarify that as much as possible? This is just an example chart, again, of governance versus operations. I know when we are smaller organizations, we do have that big operational focus. But if we're talking about, okay, you know, for programs, for example, you know, the governance side, the board is going to help us approve that annual budget for our programs and help us, you know, ensure that we have adequate resources. Whereas the operations side is actually going to develop the plans to implement the program and is going to manage those day-to-day activities. So where it can be kind of stressful sometimes is if in our smaller kind of grassroots stage, if board members are playing too heavy a role in like program development and managing day-to-day activities. And we're thinking, you know, this is really not the role of the board. That is the role of staff, or we don't have any staff, fine. But do we need to find some volunteers that are strictly operational volunteers? Just because we have people that love us and want to support our organization does not mean every single person needs to be on the board. We can have folks that continue to volunteer and support our programs and services, and they never have to sit on the board. So keeping that in mind, like what is the right mix of people, you know, skill sets, demographics that are really going to make our board stronger versus who do we need to help us out with the actual day-to-day activities. So, you know, just don't forget about that. We're not off the hook just because we don't have any staff. If we don't have any staff, how do we segregate our board meetings as much as possible to allow room for discussion of both operations and strategy? Because an operational discussion is really not what color are the napkins going to be for the event? Like that's like such a silly small thing. We don't need to waste, you know, a lot of board time on talking about that. But of course, someone has to plan the event. And if we don't have staff, the board is playing a role. But then it's how are we segregating our agenda to say like, okay, if our meetings are 2 hours, we are going to dedicate, you know, 30 minutes or 45 or whatever is the best mix to talking about the operations today. And then the rest of the meeting, we have to get through this other side, the governance. And is that, you know, we're really talking about doing a board evaluation, the CEO evaluation, etc. So just, I was going to have a quick discussion here, but we have Kelly, I know, who is not served yet, but just maybe Camille, have you had any issues when it comes to kind of the governance versus operation at your organization? Feel free to share.
I want to say yes. Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. So where have you had any struggles there?
So when it comes to the board roles and duties, like you said, my executive director, she's kind of our what's it called, boots to the ground.
Right.
However, she will, which she is supposed to be, I understand, but it kind of gets complicated because between she, I, and our vice president, it kind of is like the only execution getting done, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I've seen her kind of take on more, which is why I'm on this meeting, so we could help try to figure out how to take the load off and delegate.
Yep, absolutely.
For the other board members. Again, when it comes to that execution, so when you say the governance versus the operations, it's kind of like nothing gets done if she isn't executing it or facilitating it getting done.
Absolutely.
So that's been sort of an issue.
Yeah, and I would say that's a really common issue, especially for, you know, smaller organizations, is that oftentimes our founders or our CEOs take on a lot of the brunt of all the work, right? They're not only doing all of the operations, they're also doing all of the governance. So it's just about how do we kind of bring some of this material back to the board and say, like, look, part of our essential roles and responsibilities are to support and advise the CEO, are to, provide adequate resources. So it's really just around like, how can we facilitate a conversation where it's like, does it seem like maybe our CEO is a little stressed out and overwhelmed? Like, how can we better support her? So thanks for sharing. That's really helpful. Thank you. So, I know we know a lot of like what our like SMART goals might be. But it's around just understanding like whose lane is it? Like if we're talking about board recruitment, for example, that's a big one where people often think like, oh, that's the role of the CEO. They're the ones that have to recruit for more board members. But really that's an essential role of board members. So it's thinking about if I know if my term is about to end and like, I'm rolling off the board in a year, who could replace me? Oftentimes it's easy if we have folks that represent larger corporations because it's like, oh, if I work at Wells Fargo, I'm sure there's someone else at Wells Fargo that could replace me. But if you don't have that kind of relationship or that kind of, professional background, it's just thinking about, is there someone in my network or our network as a nonprofit that I think could be a good person to step in and, provide really, strategic thought and leadership for our board. So it's like, how can we kind of stay in our lane, but then understand also, how do we work as a team and what are our goals for this year and for the next couple of years? And what kind of additional support will we need to get us there? So let's look at some more of those roles and responsibilities. The basic things here are how do I, as a board member, not only help govern the organization as part of this collaborative team, this group, but how do I also support the organization as an individual? Because every single board member has some unique, matrix of like time, talent, and treasure. I'm sure that's what you've heard a lot, the time, talent, and treasure. But I have some unique ability to be able to support the organization. And is it that I bring functional expertise? Oftentimes when I've served on a board, I work in the nonprofit field. So my expertise is really coming from understanding nonprofits. So I can provide that expertise. Maybe the expertise that you're looking for right now is you do need someone in the legal field or in the banking field, or maybe you work for Habitat and you need someone, in the construction field, whatever it is. Or do you need, board members that also have that ability to be ambassadors that are really great about going out there and pitching the mission and connecting us with new people, or people that are really, they're like, hey, I'm not great at fundraising, but I'm perfectly happy to call someone up after they've donated and say, thank you so much, like how much that means to us. So, really thinking about like, what role could I play at actually actively supporting the mission work here? And then when we look at our board responsibilities, so on the left side, these are the 10 basic responsibilities of nonprofit boards. They are like the essential ones that you'll find if you Google, and hopefully, any board that you're serving on, this should be like part of a board expectations statement that is put in your board packet and onboarding manual. So kind of looking at, what is the board expected to do? Things like help determine the mission and purpose of the organization, select and evaluate the CEO, ensure effective planning, monitoring our programs and services, ensuring financial resources, providing that financial oversight, building a competent board. That's that recruitment I was talking about, ensuring the legal and ethical integrity, and enhancing the organization's public image. So how do I, as a board member, make sure that I am fulfilling every checkbox here? And then in contrast, how does the CEO play into that? The CEO, of course, is leading, the staff and leading and implementing the operational side, right? But of course, they still have a big role to play in fundraising. They still have a role to play in developing that future leadership and building relationships. But so how can the board help with those things? Because it is so crucial, that tie between the two, the CEO and the board. You're really the ones that are moving the organization forward. So, I was going to stop here again and say, what are the most, difficult responsibilities to execute? I feel like the major one that we hear a lot is fundraising, of course. Camille, I don't know if there's one that has been harder for you, or Kelly, if there's one you assume will be harder, feel free to share.
Fundraising for sure has been a tough one. Even one you just said about board members, that's what getting new board members, building a strong board, that has been one of the primary focuses for us to close this year out. So I love that you touched on that, and I was wondering if by chance, I don't know if it's coming soon or if you plan to talk about it or not, but do you mind touching on that a bit, on how would you build a strong, I know you gave the resource earlier when you first started on the board bank.
Yes.
So that's something that I know we would definitely look into. But besides that, do you have any tips on building a strong board? How do you get out and solicit for board members?
Yeah. So, I'd say some of the biggest things are, again, kind of that network mapping. And there's a whole exercise you can do on that. And it doesn't have to be really fancy. I can actually I have an example that I can send in our follow-up resources as well. But it's like, if you've never done one, maybe you have in like high school or college or something, but like you can actually draw these little circles of like, who all is in my network. And oftentimes we forget about what our networks even are, but it's like, do I have an after work or whatever weekend hobby, such as, playing a sport or dancing or going to the gym? Do I have some pals that I connect with in that network? What about, do I go to church? Do I have a network there? What about, my family and friends and their attachments to networks? Oftentimes, I might not already know the person's name and all of that, but if I have some friends, that I know work in corporate fields that have attachments to specific people that I think could be interesting for my nonprofit, kind of laying out all of those various bubbles of networks of like, is it my school, my alumni, my neighborhood? Like, am I part of a teachers association or something? Like, what are all of my networks? And have I talked to any of these people recently about this nonprofit I'm so in love with and that I support? Have I shared the elevator pitch? Have I talked to them about coming to a program or event that we hold? Because, it's hard to just cold call someone and be like, hey, you should join this board. But how can I kind of hook them on the reel of like, this is a really important organization to me. I'd love to tell you more about it. We actually have an event coming up in a few weeks. Could you be my date to that? I'd love for you to come with me and learn about it. Or is it people already in the network of the nonprofit, such as folks that are been volunteering for 10 plus years, and they are really great volunteers and they've never been tapped for like a leadership role? It's like, hey, you do so great about, coming and volunteering every single year. Have you ever thought about serving on the board? So there's so many different ways we can do it, but it is about kind of like exploring deeper those networks that we already hold. And I will say, one of the biggest things about our board bank is oftentimes, we'll have postings there, but we don't have as many as we'd like. And we'll get calls from people at like CSX and Wells Fargo and Mayo. And they're like, hey, we're trying to look for some nonprofits to pair board members with. And, we only see like 2 postings on your board bank. Can you tell us about any other nonprofits looking for board members? So, these are the types of folks that reach out to us. So I would just say, if you want to get in front of those corporations as well, post to our board bank, show that you have an opening. And then Kelly, I just wanted to pause because I haven't given you a chance to talk a lot, but is there anything you're most kind of worried about or stressed about in joining a board?
I'm not stressed about the responsibilities of being on the board. So for the Healing Hearts Project, I've been a donor and helped fundraise for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So I understand the heartbeat of their organization, and I have a corporate background in accounting and finance. So they've actually asked me to take on their treasurer role next year. So for me, I guess my concern is just switching from the corporate hat of a for-profit organization to a nonprofit, and just
Right.
kind of adapting my mindset for that. But as far as board responsibilities, no, I don't think I'll have any issues.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do think, like earlier, that whole business model thing with nonprofits, it's interesting how many people I know from like a corporate, like for-profit background are like, oh yeah, this makes a ton of sense. And then they get into the boardroom and look at these financial statements and they're like, what? These statements are kind of all over the place and they're not a lot like for-profit financial statements. And it really is because, sadly, our funding models can be so cyclical and can be so varied. Oftentimes, if you're working like with government agencies, it's crazy how they get these grants, but the grant contract is more or less saying, do all this work and their reimbursement. So it's like you're going to do this work and then you're going to get paid for that grant 6 months later after the work is already completed. So that can make, financial documents all crazy because you're like, wait, we did this program in this quarter, but we didn't get the funding for it until this quarter. Like, how do we match that up? Why is there this weird deficit from this quarter? And it's just sometimes the timing of these grants and contracts and things that can make things really, kind of difficult. But yeah, that's a good one to highlight as well. I think the kind of taking off the corporate hat and seeing how does a nonprofit really make sense of it all. So thanks for sharing that. And I will, Camille, I'll send out that kind of network mapping example that I have that could be like a good exercise to just do with your board.
Thank you so much.
So, yeah, no problem. So a couple more things here. So that financial contribution piece, this is a best practice. I will say it's 100% a best practice. Funders and grantors, they look for it. They ask about it on grant documents. They'll say, does 100% of your board contribute to the organization? The answer they want to see is yes, because, a funder is going to say, why would I donate if your own board is not donating? However, we know that with, newer conversations in the last several years around diversity and inclusion and equity, what does it mean? Does it make sense? Is there roles for board members who may not have the financial means to give, but have the knowledge, have the expertise, have the passion and the drive to give their time, and their expertise? A lot of times when we're looking at nonprofits that serve maybe, vulnerable populations like children or those that have benefited from some sort of service that has been provided by the nonprofit, it makes a ton of sense to invite like youth. Even you can actually in the state of Florida have someone that is under the age of 18 but is at least 15 serving on your board. So while that 15-year-old might not be able to donate, we can learn a lot from that 15-year-old about how they experience our programs and services and how we might want to make adjustments based on that youth perspective. So, financial means does not guarantee a good governing board member. It just doesn't. Just because they write a check doesn't mean they'll show up and have the brain power to give to you. So yes, it's an expectation, but really it's how can we make this equitable for a full board and one that is diverse. Not only, diversity means lots of things. It could be diversity of ability. We have a nonprofit called the Center for Independent Living. And so they have a mandated rule that a certain percentage of their board has to be made up of folks that have different abilities. So again, just the knowledge expertise that benefits that board as opposed to just the financial component. So questions that can be talked about at your board if you've had these kinds of discussions. And then, what can the board do when it comes to fundraising? It's really about, is it showing some kind of personal, meaningful care? Is it that I could host a fundraising event at my home or at a location that I'm aware of? Can I invite our CEO or our development person to come with me to another event? So, if you're trying to spread awareness about your organization and get your CEO in front of more people, do you have those connections where maybe your CEO is the one doing the asking, but you could actually just put them in a room full with people that they don't already know to kind of make those new connections? Can we again call donors and just check in and thank them for things? Oftentimes a lot of board members do have hesitancy to get involved in fundraising because they think it's just the ask, but really we know from the donor cycle that the ask should really only be that 5%. And the major part of fundraising is really developing relationships. So if we do have those people on the board that are just great great talkers, connectors. They'll remember your grandma's name and they'll know her birthday and they'll ask about her. That should be the board member that is calling that donor to say, hey, we love you. Thank you so much. How's grandma? So think about what are the roles that you could play when it comes to fundraising if you're maybe not necessarily the asker. And then probably not the board's role. Again, we say probably because when we are talking about smaller grassroots organizations, board members do often have to play more of an operational role, but probably not the board's role is grant writing, acknowledgement letters, doing the database management. Generally, we don't see board members involved in those capacities, but if you do need support in these areas, is there the potential to find an operational volunteer that could help support this effort, if not a staff person, or contracting, with there's a lot of grant writers out there that really just work on a consulting contract basis as opposed to being, part-time or full-time staff members. So thinking about this, if you're looking at this list and you're like, our board does all of that right now, well, then how could we maybe talk to the board about look, we need to start separating out these duties. Do we have other folks that could come on and help us in any of these ways? And then, we do know from research with CEOs that this is really the biggest gap when it comes to job satisfaction, is that CEOs do feel like the board does not often play the role in fundraising that they are supposed to. So, if our CEO is feeling that way, again, how can we bring this to the board table, talk about it? What does the board need to do to really commit to the responsibility of ensuring adequate financial, capacity for the organization? And can we start to talk about what does that mean? Can we help identify some new prospects, some new donors, some new corporations? And of course, fundraising really can't be successful without resources invested. So that resource is time, someone willing to take the time to sit down and look for new grants, look for those relationships, make the connections, make the, attend the meeting, make the call, but also just the resource of sometimes, we really don't think about our social media or our marketing, and we haven't put a lot of dollars towards that recently. Well, as we've heard, you got to spend a little money to make a little money. So maybe we need to do some social, paid ads, some boosted posts. We need to spend some more time on getting our name out there if that's part of the problem. So thinking about, fundraising really is the full job of everyone at an organization. Even, if you just have someone that's answering the calls or is working a front desk or is working a thrift shop or something, those people should also have the ability to give an elevator pitch. And, if someone comes to them hey, is there a way to donate to your organization? You never want to have someone working the thrift shop be I don't actually know. I'll find someone you can talk to. It's no, here's how you can donate. Here's our website. Here's the, whatever you need to make that happen in the moment. And so just a little bit around what they call new governance thinking. This is really from BoardSource, which is, again, this national nonprofit board kind of database of collective knowledge. But, we've talked about the fiduciary responsibilities, that strategy side, but at the bottom, there's this generative thinking, which is really around thinking about how can the board, have this willingness to kind of steered the board culture towards more shared responsibility and shared governance. Everyone has that ability to, again, raise their hand, actively participate in discussions, setting aside any preconceived notions, because, sometimes when we have had people on the board for so many years, it's, that idea is stupid. We tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. Well, maybe the reason it didn't work 10 years ago was environmental, political, whatever. Maybe that idea this newer board member has isn't stupid. It's just, it didn't work then and maybe it'll work now. So sometimes generative is really around this idea of kind of zero-based budgeting, starting from the bottom and saying, not that we need to have a bunch of quality ideas, but we need to have a bunch of quantity of ideas. So let's everyone come around the table and everyone pitch, an idea or a thought, whether it's about the programs or it's about donors or it's about our strategy. Everyone come to the table just ready to pitch in at all what they think. And from there, you can find a little more traction around, oh, wow, everyone on our board seems to think we should be doing this for our mission, and we don't do that. So what does that mean? How can we approach that and maybe change what we're currently doing? So, really thinking about, kind of like SWOT, which again, I kind of mentioned before, but if you've ever done a SWOT analysis, what that is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So, how is our board doing that? Like constantly scanning the environment, practicing that reflective thinking of saying, okay, this is what happened last year, and that was all well and good. But, is there something that we're currently doing that we shouldn't be doing anymore because it's really A, not bringing in enough money, and B, not actually having the kind of impact on our community like we thought it would? And that's okay. That's okay to say, oftentimes what we're doing here with the nonprofit is we have this theory of change. Well, a theory is something that is to be tested, right? So our theories could have flaws along the way. So it's okay to say we really reflected on this program and we think it's not so beneficial anymore. So we're going to stop doing it. It's really a waste of our time. And now we have a tough challenge of saying, what's next for our organization? Is there a new program that should we be investing in and offering that would really have more impact and maybe bring in some kind of earned revenue for our organization? So these are kind of the hard parts. A lot of board members during the pandemic, this is what they have to do, is step aside and say, okay, let's reframe. We had this budget for the year of 2020 or 2021, and now we have to throw that budget out the door and kind of start over. Like, what's our next kind of short-term budget for the next 3 to 6 months? So transformational board members, what we really have to do is just be comfortable having these kind of productive conflict moments, be comfortable like looking at our policies and procedures and saying, does this serve everyone equitably? Sometimes we're so focused on, our constituents or the communities that we serve, but maybe our staff persons that we're paying are still at the bottom scale of minimum wage and they're barely making it through the day. So is that equitable? Like, how do we need to reframe looking at our policies and procedures for our own internal staff people? How can we avoid also being micromanaging of like our CEO and staff or operational volunteers, and trust that, everyone has their role to play, operations and we're governance. So this is really what we think about when we think of transformational boards. And of course, another great board source quote, but boards are disconnected from the communities and people they serve. So how do we work on that? How do we change it? Diversity is really not a nice to have anymore. That sadly used to be the way folks looked at it. But we know that diversity of, backgrounds, demographics, even regions, if you serve like Northeast Florida, is everyone on your board from Duval? We should have some folks from Nassau, Clay, Baker. What does it really mean to have diversity? For every nonprofit, that's going to be different, right? If your organization serves, a really specific niche of people, does anyone that reflects that community have any say on the board or any kind of feedback mechanism at play for your organization? So maybe even sitting down and having the conversation of what does diversity mean to us can be a really great brain exercise for the board. Again, if you do a lot of heavy service in like a Hispanic speaking population, does anyone on the board represent that? Does anyone know what that means to like be speaking Spanish solely and not have those kind of connections to your programs? So just thinking about it, what does diversity mean? And we know that diverse teams are generally stronger and more productive. So just another plight for how can we think about what does it mean to diversify? And just from our most recent compensation and benefits report that the Nonprofit Center does put out around the sector, like staffing and benefits, is really, it's interesting. We know that the sector leadership is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly female. So again, what does that mean for sustainability of the sector, how we're building relationships, how we're connecting to the communities we serve? Our average CEO is 55. So like our very own CEO at the Nonprofit Center, who's set to retire at the end of this year, we have seen a wave of retirements across the Northeast Florida region. So who's next? Who's next in line for leadership? And has the CEO and the board like really thoughtfully talked about that? Because, sometimes the CEO leaves and the rest of the staff is looking around like, I have no skills and like ready to become a leader. So how do I do that? How do I invest in our staff to gain those skills? So just some more interesting tidbits to think about. And you can actually find our whole compensation and benefits report for 2023 on our website. And then a few great pieces from Leap of Reason, which is just another great resource. And I'll send links to all these resources after the session. But this is just how they kind of think about the leadership approach. Is a lot of stuff we've already talked about, but you as a board member, have you thought recently about how you're helping to marshal external partners and resources? Like, are there a lot of potential partners out there that you could collaborate with that would increase your capacity that have just never been explored? Or how am I helping to cultivate diversity and inclusion? Or how am I helping to play a role on really encouraging our organization to seek feedback? Like, maybe we haven't done a big survey of our membership base in several years, and we need to learn more about them. So just things that, just because we're board members and maybe you think like surveying our membership would be a staff role, it's okay to say like, hey, I don't know, have we done that recently? Like, could the staff tell us about it? Like, me as a board member, I'd love to learn more about how we do that, how we collect feedback from our participants. So just thinking about ways that I can step up and again, raise my hand to ask thoughtful questions at the board table. A few more great findings from Leading with Intent. Only 20% of CEOs feel their board members were adequately prepared for board meetings. So that's a bummer, right? CEOs are already stressed out, they're overwhelmed. So how is the board, stepping up and playing their role, reading all of the minutes, actively participating during board meetings? Of course, a piece of that is on the CEO. Materials should be sent out in advance of board meetings, not like 2 hours in advance, but at least a couple of days. And have we done evaluations of board performance recently? You can do that in several different ways. You could evaluate individual performance. You could evaluate board meetings. Like, maybe your board meetings are really report, and there's not enough discussion. You could actually look at your board meetings and say, like, is this working for us? This kind of structure, this agenda. And then don't forget to evaluate the CEO. A lot of CEOs say to us that they haven't had a CEO performance evaluation in 3-5 years, and it's like, hey, just because you think they're doing a great job, maybe formally tell them they are, or give them some stretch goals to kind of live up to in the next couple of years. And of course, this last bullet is really important and true, that stronger understanding of programs is actually linked to stronger performance and stronger fundraising. So if we want our board members to go out there and do an elevator pitch, like, let's mix it up. It doesn't have to be the standard, like, here's our mission, connect, strengthen, advocate for a strong nonprofit community, but maybe a pitch that involves like, hey, I went to this program or I went to this event and I saw, XYZ person, child, dog, whatever it is being helped. And here's what that meant to me. That impact, tugged at my heartstrings. And let me tell you why. So how do we build stories that are really powerful, that involve knowledge, specific knowledge from programs that we offer? And just a quick thing on just effective board meeting practices. It really is all about how are they structured. And we really want to think about board meetings as the most expensive meeting that a nonprofit will ever hold. Because if you're looking around the board table and you have your dentist or a lawyer or whatever it is, the folks in that room all have such varied expertises and backgrounds that if we were to think about their hourly wage and calculate that, based on everyone in the room and the time our board meetings take, that's a pretty pricey meeting, right? So how do we fully engage board members with a strong, effective meeting practice where there is actual time built into agendas for discussion? Instead of just 10 minutes to review the financials, it's like, okay, yeah, we had 10 minutes to like literally just, hopefully we had looked at the financials before the meeting, but we had 10 minutes to really just have our treasurer, our board chair address them. And then there was no time to actually discuss. And now we're way off base and we don't have time for other stuff on the agenda. How can we ensure that really the board chair who's facilitating has strong facilitation skills and understands and knows when to kind of not just cut people off bluntly and rudely, but if we literally don't have time to talk about something today, it's not like that's not important and we are not going to talk about that today, but wow, that's a really great point. We do need to discuss it. we'll have to talk about that at the next board meeting? Or is it so vital and important and like time-based that we actually need to schedule a secondary like follow-up call to this board meeting to discuss that item? So just how are we making sure that board meetings are really structured well? And, you know, engagement through meetings, things like the mission moment. I don't know if you all have done that at your meetings, but that's really referring to things like, do we have someone that's benefited from our program that's willing to come and share about that impact, or a staff person to share about that impact? Do we have these agenda items in every meeting, such as, you know, board recruitment, organizational planning, a moment for education and learning? So these are just key things to think about as we are structuring meetings. And if you feel like things are missing from your agenda, you know, it's okay, again, to bring that to the table and say, hey, look, our board meetings are great and all, but we never hear anything really passionate or impactful. And that kind of is like a bummer. It feels like it's all work, work, work. Like, let's have a mission moment built into our next board meeting. That would be really cool. And then the last thing really here is on effective committees is just, you know, committees again is where board work happens. So whether, you know, it's virtual or not, you know, committees can meet virtually, they can meet by phone, whatever the rules of your organization are, you know, just how are we really focused on the strategy at all times and not getting sidetracked in the operational stuff, but saying, you know, we have like a calendar in place. Like if it's a governance committee, for example, we know that every quarter there's like a specific bullet item that we need to take care of, such as, hey, this quarter we have to do our CEO evaluation, or this quarter we're going to do the board evaluation, or this quarter we really need to be thinking about how, you know, 3 of our board members are going to roll off in the next 2 years. Have we talked about the board pipeline recently? So what is the right mix of work that each committee is doing, and then who are the right people for those committees? Of course, it makes total sense if you have someone in accounting sitting on the finance committee, but also thinking about, as we bring in new board members, how are we giving them opportunities to learn about the inner workings of our boards and our organizations, and giving them ways to learn more and to excel on their own? Because once that awesome accountant, rolls off that committee, who's going to fill your shoes and do a really great job of being treasurer? So structuring committees, generally it's through your bylaws. And again, bylaws amendment is something that a governance committee would do. So if your bylaws are super outdated and you guys haven't looked at those in 4 or 5 years, maybe that's a great role for a governance committee in the next couple of months, is like, hey, let's do a review of our bylaws. But what do our committees structure really look like? Our typical, like your main 3 that I would say almost every nonprofit should have, if they're large enough, if the board is large enough: finance, governance, and development. But then you might have some operational committees if you say do a lot of like facilities, programs, operational kind of work. That is pretty typical. And then, you know, are these ongoing committees, or is it something that really doesn't need to be a committee, but is like a short term, again, example of like a task force or something that is time limited? Okay, so I was going to launch one more poll, but I won't launch it. I will just ask, you know, are there any kind of educational practices that you have used, maybe Camille, at your board to kind of develop the skills of your board members, such as like board trainings or any kind of like board mentorship or anything?
We recently did dive into some resources. I believe you all were one of the resources. So we had a meeting link sent out for proper board structure. So to give every board member a background, you know, on the hierarchy pretty much of what is and what's done by each board member. And then also this meeting, of course, I don't think it's not today, but prior to a training such as this one.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. That's exactly what I was going to say, or things like this board roles training, this could be an easy way to increase like just a checkbox of engagement for your board members. Say, hey, does anyone on our board want to go to the next board roles training at the Nonprofit Center? Like we'll do it in January, happy to have them. But sometimes, yeah, for like newer or maybe younger board members, like a board mentorship program can be helpful, pairing up like a more veteran board member with someone that's newer on the board so they can learn the culture, learn what's how it functions. Or maybe there's other practices such as, training on relevant topics. Like oftentimes, say your organization is about to delve into a big capital campaign or some kind of fundraising campaign. It might be nice to have like a fundraising training from either your like fund development staff person or like an external consultant or someone that could come in and just give the board a general like ABCs on what it means to have a capital campaign. So things like that can just be really easy ways to, again, say we're working to increase, the education of our board members, because we should also see serving as a board member for a nonprofit should be a mutual beneficial arrangement for board members as well. Like you are also getting something out of it, that kind of professional development, or maybe for some people it is kind of a checkbox for their own careers that they're able to say like, hey, I served on the board of this organization. So thinking about it that way, how can the nonprofit itself do more to actually give something back to their board members when it comes to skills? So, really last thing here is just around how are we an advocate? Again, Nonprofit Center is huge about advocacy for board members. So me as a board member, every time I speak on behalf of the organization I serve, I am actively representing that organization. So, do we trust that our board members are good ambassadors of us? And do they have like a way to talk about us? Do they have that kind of unique pitch that they can give? And just some way to participate in the development cycle, whether it's the identification side of things or it's the stewardship side. Every board member should play a role in that cycle in some way. So just how are we constantly talking and thinking about that as like a role of an ambassador is helping for that financial piece. So last piece here from Stand By Your Mission, really they are saying that sometimes board members are more influential than the highest paid lobbyists because funders sit down with the CEO and development staff all the time. But when they see a volunteer board member come to a meeting, it just, again, makes that impression that they are really passionate, that they really care. And this board member is willing to take their own time from their day to come meet with them and talk about the organization. That can be so powerful. So last little pause was for any like discussion of any like next steps that you all might want to take back to your teams. So I'll pause there. And then Jamera, if you'd want to drop into the chat while they're thinking, maybe our survey link for the day. I know it was just a few of you, but it would be really helpful if you have any feedback for us. We have a survey. It's a really short one that you could take. But any closing like thoughts or anything from you all?
This was really helpful. I didn't know what to expect, so I really appreciate it. I wish I had more to contribute, but if you ask me next month, I would.
Oh yeah, well, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. And I was gonna say, normally there are way more people on this call, so it's just funny that it worked out as such a small group today, but I hope it was still helpful for you. And Camille, I appreciate you being willing to jump in and share so much about your own board. That's really helpful too.
Yes, I agree with Kelly. This has definitely been a phenomenal training. I wish you could see my notes over here. You could just scroll and scroll and scroll, but it also has me reflecting more than anything, even upon myself, thinking like, okay, am I making the impact that I should on my board? So I love that you spoke about evaluating the board members. I feel like that's something that has not been done throughout the years. So it's just been kind of ongoing. So I love that more than anything so far, but I really do appreciate this training as well.
Thank you both so much. Like I said, the board service is really like a big niche of ours also at the Nonprofit Center, and I oversee like our board trainings. We have several that we do throughout the year, not just board roles, but in the spring we'll have something around board fundraising, and we also have like a board fellowship program for those that are brand new to boards. So just things to think about. Again, tons of events and stuff that are always going on, but we'll follow up today, or probably not today, probably not till tomorrow, but with an email with like the virtual recording link and some resources that I mentioned. But if either of you have questions at all, please feel free to email me. But thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye.